When you chase an avoidant for clarity, reassurance, or emotional closeness, you're not just reaching for love. You're pressing on the exact nerve their nervous system has been trained to protect. Your intention is connection, but what they often feel is pressure. And pressure, to an avoidant, leaning partner, can feel like danger wearing the mask of love. This is why your most loving behaviors can accidentally produce their most painful reactions. You send a heartfelt message because you want to repair. They go quiet because they feel overwhelmed. You ask a simple question like, "Where do I stand with you?" And they suddenly act distant because the question sounds like a demand they might fail. You try to talk through a misunderstanding, and they withdraw as if the conversation itself is a threat to their freedom. It's not that your needs are wrong. It's that their system interprets emotional intensity as the beginning of losing control. Many avoidants were shaped by early experiences that taught them a silent lesson: closeness can come with cost. Sometimes that cost was criticism. Sometimes it was emotional chaos. Sometimes it was being expected to carry someone else's feelings without having room for their own. So they built a survival identity around self-reliance. They learned to regulate alone. They learned to keep emotional doors partially closed. They learned that needing too much could be unsafe. When you chase them, especially when your energy is urgent, pleading, or emotionally heavy, it can awaken that old fear. I'm about to be swallowed. I'm about to be responsible for a storm I can't control. So their system does what it has always done to survive: it shuts down. The shutdown isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like delayed replies. Sometimes it looks like short, logical responses. Sometimes it looks like them becoming busy, distracted, neutral. Sometimes it looks like, "I just need space," without a clear timeline. The pattern is consistent even if the behavior changes shape. When the emotional temperature rises, their body chooses distance as relief. And here's where your heart gets trapped. Because when they pull back, you naturally move closer. You try to fix it. You try to reassure them. You try to explain yourself better. You think the solution to distance is more clarity, more effort, more love. But the avoidant system often experiences that extra closeness as more pressure. So you escalate for connection, and they escalate for safety. The dynamic becomes a loop where your pursuit becomes the fuel for their withdrawal, and their withdrawal becomes the fuel for your pursuit. This is the anxious, avoidant trap in its rawest form. And the reason, leaving them alone, can be so powerful is not because it's a trick. It's because it breaks the nervous system pattern. When you stop chasing, the avoidant finally stops feeling emotionally cornered. Their body gets room to breathe. The alarm quiets. And in that quiet, feelings that were buried under overwhelm can begin to surface. They may finally miss you without the pressure of proving something immediately. They may reflect without feeling attacked. They may feel love without simultaneously feeling trapped by it. That doesn't mean every avoidant returns. It means your chase was not the cure. It was often the trigger. This truth can be painful to accept because it feels unfair. You were trying to love them properly. You were trying to save the bond. You were trying to communicate like an adult. But avoidant patterns are less about logic and more about survival wiring. Your calm request may still be heard through their fear filter. Your genuine need may still sound like a demand. Your emotional honesty may still feel like a test they're about to fail. So the healthiest move is not to become colder. It's to become clearer. You learn to stop chasing what should be freely given. You don't punish them. You don't humiliate them. You don't launch a dramatic exit speech. You simply step back and let your absence do what your arguments couldn't. Your silence becomes a boundary that says, "I won't force closeness. I also won't beg for basic emotional presence." This is where you reclaim dignity, because chasing can sometimes turn love into an audition, and your heart was never meant to perform for consistency. What happens next reveals the truth. If they are capable of growth, your calm distance may create the space where they finally choose you with intention, not with panic. They may return with more self-awareness and a willingness to build healthier rhythm. But if they are not capable of growth, your distance still protects you from becoming stuck in a relationship where your emotional labor is the only thing keeping it alive. This keynote is not telling you to become silent forever. It's telling you to stop feeding a pattern that punishes your love. Because the moment you're chasing becomes the price of their presence, the relationship has already stopped being emotionally safe. Leaving them alone, even for a season, isn't about winning them back. It's about ending the chase, withdrawal economy, and giving both of you a chance to see what's real without the noise of panic and pursuit. Space helps their emotions catch up because many avoidant, leaning people don't process closeness in real time the way you do. Where you might feel love, fear, longing, and urgency all at once, they often experience a delayed emotional wave. In the moment of intimacy, their nervous system can go quiet, rational, or numb. It's not always because they don't care. It can be because caring vs too much triggers overwhelm, and overwhelm triggers shutdown. So they default to the safest setting they know: emotional self-containment. This is why you can have a beautiful night together and then wake up to distance. You can share a vulnerable conversation and then feel them pull away the next day. You can sense how real the connection was and still be confused by their sudden coolness afterward. What you're witnessing isn't always a lie. Sometimes you're witnessing an internal alarm switching on after closeness. Their mind starts running old protective scripts. This is getting serious. I might be needed. I might fail. I could lose control. If I let this in, will I lose myself? The more intimate the moment, the louder the aftershock can be. Space lowers that alarm. When you step back, the environment stops feeling emotionally crowded. The avoidance system can exit survival mode. Without the immediate intensity of your presence and needs, their emotional state has room to expand again. The pressure to respond perfectly in real time disappears. The fear of being consumed by expectations quiets. And that's when you often see something surprising: their feelings surface. They might start remembering how safe you actually were, how much you gave without demanding a performance, how rare your consistency felt, how tender the closeness was before their nerves panicked. Distance gives them the chance to feel what they couldn't access under pressure. To you, that can sound unfair. Why do they only realize it when you're gone? Why do they only soften when you stop trying? But this is a common avoidant rhythm. When closeness feels like a test, they shut down. When closeness becomes a choice they can approach on their own timing, they regulate and reconnect emotionally. Your absence removes the sense of being cornered and replaces it with internal reflection. This is also why your speeches often don't work the way you hope. You might explain your pain clearly, lovingly, logically. But if their nervous system is already overloaded, your clarity lands as weight. And then the avoidant protects themselves by shutting down harder. You're trying to open a door with words while their body is still barricading it. Space works differently. Space doesn't demand immediate emotional skill. Space gives the body time to calm enough for the heart to speak. But this keynote isn't telling you to disappear to trigger them. That would just be another game. The real value of space is that it helps both of you step out of the chase, withdraw cycle. When you constantly reach for reassurance, you keep their system activated. When you calm your pursuit, you give their system a chance to feel love without feeling trapped by it. At the same time, you give your own nervous system a chance to stop living on edge. Because you also have a delayed emotional pattern in this dynamic. When you're constantly chasing, you're not feeling your full truth either. You're in survival mode too. You're trying to preserve connection. You're managing their mood. You're interpreting silence. You're staying hopeful. Space lets your heart catch up to reality. It lets you feel the exhaustion you've normalized. It lets you see the pattern without adrenaline. It lets your standards come back online. And that's where this keynote becomes protective. Even if the avoidance feelings rise in space, you don't automatically rush back into the same cycle. You don't treat their sudden tenderness as proof that the relationship is now safe. You treat it as information. You observe whether they can handle closeness without needing distance as a reflex. You look for signals of real growth, earlier communication, clearer requests for space, respectful timelines, consistent effort in calm moments. Because yes, distance can help an avoidant feel again. But feeling again is not the same as loving safely. Sometimes an avoidant will miss you intensely in space, then retreat again once closeness returns. That doesn't make their feelings fake. It means their skill set hasn't caught up to their emotion. They crave you, but they still fear the responsibilities of intimacy. This is why your standards matter more than their longing. Longing is easy. Consistency is the real proof. So if you're leaving them alone, do it for the right reason. Do it because you refuse to keep forcing intimacy with someone who can't hold it yet. Do it because your heart deserves a relationship that doesn't require you to chase emotional availability. Do it because space is healthier than pressure for both nervous systems. And if they return, the healthiest way to respond is not with instant surrender and not with cold revenge. It's with calm structure. You can be open without being naive. You can be warm without being loose with your boundaries. You can say, I care about you, and if we reconnect, I need consistency and clear communication. That sentence honors their nervous system and protects yours. That is the real meaning of this keynote. Space is where an avoidance emotional truth can rise and where your self-respect can stabilize, so whatever happens next is built on clarity instead of chaos. Independence is their safety identity, and this is one of the deepest reasons avoidant-leaning people can seem like they need you to leave them alone. Because for them, distance isn't always a lack of love. Sometimes it's a way of protecting the self-image that kept them emotionally safe long before you arrived. Their independence is not just a personality trait, it's a survival story. Many avoidants learned early that relying on people could be dangerous. Maybe connection came with criticism. Maybe emotions in the home were unpredictable. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe they were rewarded for being strong and subtly punished for being soft. So they adapted. They built a version of themselves that could function without needing much. They trained their nervous system to self-soothe alone. They became experts at emotional self-control, and as years passed, this became identity. I'm fine on my own. I don't need anyone. I handle my own problems. The world may praise that as confidence, but inside, it can also be a protective wall that says, if I don't need too much, I can't be hurt too deeply. Now place that identity inside an intimate relationship. Real love naturally asks for interdependence. Not dependency, but mutual emotional influence. You matter to each other. Your needs exist. Your presence changes the emotional environment. And for an avoidant, that can feel like a quiet threat to their internal order. Not because you're wrong. Not because your needs are unreasonable, but because closeness challenges the old rule that kept them safe. I survive by staying in control of my emotional exposure. This is why an avoidant can love you and still feel activated by your expectations. Even healthy expectations can sound like emotional obligation in their system. Can we talk about us? Can feel like pressure. I need reassurance. Can feel like responsibility they might fail. Where is this going? Can feel like a doorway that locks behind them. The more serious the bond becomes, the more they may feel as if they're about to lose the part of themselves that used independence as armor. So they pull back, and your heart often interprets that as rejection. But what's happening internally can be more nuanced. They may be trying to protect their identity, not escape your value. Their distance can be a nervous system strategy that says, I need to reset into myself so I don't feel swallowed by closeness. This is why your constant pursuit can intensify their retreat, because pursuit feels like a force working against the identity they depend on. The more you push for emotional certainty, the more they may feel their independence being challenged. And when that identity feels threatened, they choose the oldest coping skill they trust: space. Here's the painful part for you. Their independence identity can turn your love into something that feels like a test you didn't sign up for. You start trying to be easier, softer, less needy. You become careful with your words. You shrink your emotional requests into tiny versions so they won't feel pressured. You may begin to think that your needs are the problem. But that's where this dynamic becomes dangerous. Because the goal is not to erase your needs to accommodate their identity. The goal is to build a healthier definition of independence inside intimacy. Healthy independence in love means, I can be close without losing myself. Avoidant independence often means, I must control distance to feel safe. That difference is everything. When you leave them alone, at least temporarily, you remove the immediate tension between their independence identity and your desire for intimacy. Their system can breathe again. They can feel like themselves again. And sometimes that space helps them realize a new truth. Closeness with the right person doesn't have to be a loss of self. It can be an expansion of safety. But that realization usually can't happen while their nervous system feels crowded or pressured. At the same time, your leaving is also a boundary that protects your dignity. Because if you keep chasing someone who equates closeness with threat, you can become stuck in a one-sided emotional economy. You take responsibility for the connection. They take responsibility for escape. Your love becomes the bridge every time, and that's not sustainable. Leaving them alone stops you from carrying a relationship that should require two stable hands. This keynote doesn't mean you must accept inconsistency forever. It means you understand the root of their reaction without turning it into permission for repeated harm. You can respect their need for autonomy and still require respectful behavior. You can honor their space and still expect communication. You can say calmly that you value closeness that is chosen and consistent, not closeness that arrives only when you shrink. If an avoidant is willing to grow, they will eventually learn to redefine independence. They will learn to request space without disappearing. They will learn to reassure you without feeling trapped. They will learn that choosing intimacy does not erase autonomy. It simply upgrades it into something more mature. A self that can stay present without panic. And if they aren't willing to grow, this understanding still helps you stop blaming yourself. Their distance is not always proof that you are too much. Sometimes it is proof that their identity is still built on survival, not on secure love. Your job is not to break that identity with force. Your job is to protect your heart while they decide whether they're ready to build a safer one. The chase, withdrawal loop is the engine that keeps anxious, avoidant relationships painful, addictive, and stuck. You chase because your heart wants safety, clarity, and reassurance. They withdraw because their nervous system wants space, control, and relief from emotional intensity. Both of you are trying to regulate fear, just in opposite directions. But when these two strategies collide, love starts feeling like a power struggle instead of a partnership. At first, the cycle is subtle. You notice they pull back after closeness, so you try to reconnect quickly. You send a thoughtful message. You ask, "Are we okay?" You offer emotional repair. You try to be the calm bridge. But the avoidant nervous system can interpret even gentle pursuit as pressure. So they create distance to breathe. Then your anxiety rises because distance feels like rejection. Your mind starts scanning for danger. You feel responsible for fixing the disconnection. So you chase again, and unintentionally, you both train the relationship into a predictable dance. Your pursuit becomes the trigger for their retreat, and their retreat becomes the trigger for your pursuit. This is why the relationship can feel intense even when nothing is technically wrong. It's not just about the events happening. It's about the pattern that your nervous systems have learned to expect. Your body learns that closeness is unstable. Their body learns that closeness becomes emotionally expensive. You begin to feel like you must work for love. They begin to feel like love will cost them freedom. And after a while, the relationship isn't being powered by secure connection. It's being powered by anxiety and relief. That's why leaving them alone, even temporarily, can be the healthiest interruption you can make. Not as a tactic, not as revenge, not as a dramatic statement, but as a nervous system reset. When you stop chasing, the avoidance alarm has a chance to quiet. They no longer feel emotionally cornered by the urgency of repair. The pressure drops. The fear of engulfment softens. And that creates space for something many avoidants struggle to access in the heat of intensity: emotional clarity. At the same time, your system also benefits, because chasing often keeps you in an emotional state of self-abandonment. You become the manager of the relationship. You monitor the mood, you soften your needs, you over-explain your heart, you try to prevent withdrawal by becoming more accommodating. Even when you love them genuinely, you can start losing yourself inside the job of keeping closeness alive. Stepping back stops you from outsourcing your peace to their availability. The chase-withdrawal loop is also why so many reconnections fail. Because the avoidant returns during a moment of fear or missing you, and you interpret the return as proof the pattern is over. You open fully again. You relax your guard. You restore access quickly, and once the threat of losing you fades, their old wiring can reassert. The demands of closeness reappear. The fear rises again. The withdrawal returns. The cycle resets with fresh pain. That's not because your hope was foolish. It's because the pattern wasn't interrupted long enough for either of you to build a new operating system. When you leave them alone in a clean, grounded way, you force the cycle to face reality. Your absence becomes the boundary that says, "I won't keep fueling this with pursuit." And that gives the relationship only two possible paths: growth or truth. Growth looks like them learning to communicate before disappearing, learning to request space with respect, learning to return to repair without you dragging them back into emotional presence. Truth looks like the relationship revealing that its stability depended almost entirely on your chasing. This is why your silence can be more healing than your explanations. You've likely already explained your needs many times. You've named the pattern. You've tried to fix it gently. If nothing changed, then the missing ingredient wasn't your clarity. It was their capacity or willingness to meet you consistently. The chase-withdrawal loop doesn't end because you explain better. It ends because you stop playing your half of the dance. A crucial detail here is intention. If you step back with the goal of manipulating a reaction, your nervous system will still remain tethered to their response. You'll count days. You'll watch for signs. You'll become emotionally hooked to the outcome. That keeps you in the loop internally, even if you're silent externally. But if you step back to restore your dignity and your emotional baseline, you're no longer chasing a person. You're choosing yourself. The healthiest way to break the loop is simple, but not easy. Stop responding to withdrawal with pursuit. Don't argue with silence. Don't negotiate with mixed signals. Don't offer full access to partial effort. Give yourself rules that protect your weakest moments. Reduce soft contact. Limit exposure to their online life. Build daily structure that doesn't leave your brain free to obsess. Replace the urge to reach out with something that grounds you in your own identity again. And if they do return, this is where the real change is tested. You don't punish them. You don't act cold. You simply require a new standard. You watch whether closeness can survive without the threat of loss. You look for calm consistency, not emergency affection. You let their behavior prove that the relationship is no longer a chase, withdrawal machine, but a mutual space where both nervous systems can feel safe. Because the real power of leaving them alone is not that it makes them miss you. The real power is that it breaks the rhythm that was breaking you. It interrupts the addiction to inconsistency. It gives you both a chance to step out of fear-based roles and see whether love can exist without chasing as the price of connection. The fifth reason avoidant, leaning people often need you to leave them alone is because distance is the only environment where real accountability can finally appear. Not accountability as punishment, not accountability as a dramatic lesson, but accountability as reality. The kind that arrives when you stop cushioning the consequences of their emotional absence with your endless forgiveness, your endless explanations, your endless emotional rescue efforts. In many anxious, avoidant dynamics, the avoidant doesn't fully feel the cost of their pattern while you're still doing all the emotional labor. They withdraw, and you reach. They go cold, and you warm the room. They disappear emotionally, and you keep the glue of the relationship alive with patience and hope. Your love becomes the safety net that prevents them from hitting the emotional ground of their own behavior. And you do it because you care, because you see their fear, because you don't want to be the person who gives up. But the unintended consequence is this: the pattern becomes survivable for them and unbearable for you. Because every time you immediately reopen the door after distance, you teach a silent rule: withdrawal has a low price. It doesn't require repair. It doesn't require growth. It doesn't require them to sit with your absence long enough to understand what they are risking. They may care about you deeply, but caring is not the same as confronting the consequences of their coping strategy. If your love keeps catching them every time they fall into avoidance, they never have to develop the muscle of showing up before damage happens. Distance changes that. Distance removes the emotional cushion. Distance creates an honest mirror. It doesn't chase them into a corner. It doesn't shame them into a confession. It simply removes the constant reassurance that they can withdraw and still keep your heart available on demand. And in that quiet, something essential can finally happen. They feel the possibility of real loss. They feel the truth that your love is not an unlimited resource that survives every cycle without cost. They feel that this time, you might not return to the same role of emotional caregiver. This is why some avoidance looks suddenly different when you stop trying. They may soften. They may reach out. They may finally acknowledge what you've been saying for months. Because your absence becomes the consequence that words couldn't deliver. Not because you planned it like a chess move, but because healthy boundaries naturally expose unhealthy patterns. This is the part that matters ethically. Leaving them alone is not a trick to make them panic. If you do it purely to provoke a reaction, you're still emotionally tied to their response. You're still living in the same loop, just wearing a quieter costume. But if you do it to protect your nervous system and your dignity, then whatever happens next is grounded in truth. You're no longer bribing the relationship with yourself, abandonment. And the truth is simple. You cannot build a secure bond with someone who only shows up when they are afraid of losing you. You can't keep accepting emergency affection as a substitute for everyday accountability. You can't keep letting short bursts of sweetness erase long patterns of emotional absence. Because the way someone treats your heart in normal times is the real measure of love, not how intensely they reach for you when you finally step away. Distance creates the conditions where the avoidant has to decide who they want to become. Not who they want to be for a week, but who they want to be consistently. Are they willing to learn healthier communication? Are they willing to name overwhelm before it becomes disappearance? Are they willing to repair without you dragging them back into connection? Are they willing to see that autonomy and intimacy can coexist without punishment? If the answer is yes, you will see it in their behavior after the crisis fades. You will see calmer effort, earlier honesty, more respectful space, real attempts to create security rather than just preserve access. They won't just say, "I miss you." They'll say it with structure, with consistency, with accountability that doesn't disappear once they feel safe again. If the answer is no, distance still protects you. It reveals that the relationship was being held together by your willingness to tolerate what your heart was quietly breaking under. It shows you that your love was not the missing ingredient. Their readiness was. This keynote is really a reminder of a hard truth many big-hearted people need to hear. Love cannot be the thing that cancels consequence. Your compassion should not become the reason someone never grows. When you keep rescuing a pattern, you become exhausted and they remain comfortable. And neither of you truly evolves. So leaving them alone when done with calm integrity is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the moment you stop protecting them from the reality of how their distance impacts a real human heart. It is the moment you stop proving you are loyal by tolerating instability. It is the moment you allow the relationship to face an honest test. Can this connection survive without you doing all the emotional heavy lifting? Because real accountability doesn't require your anger. It requires your boundaries. And when those boundaries are steady, respectful, and consistent, you finally create the only environment where an avoidant can either rise into healthier love or reveal that they are not ready to hold what you've been offering all along. Your silence protects your dignity because there comes a point where love stops being love if it requires you to keep abandoning yourself to keep someone close. This is the part people don't talk about enough because it sounds too simple, too quiet, too unromantic. But for an avoidant dynamic, this is often the most life-changing truth of all. Leaving them alone is not just about giving their nervous system space. It's about giving yourself room to breathe again. When you're in a chase, withdraw pattern, your love can slowly turn into emotional labor. You become the one who initiates repair. You become the one who holds hope. You become the one who smooths over the awkward silences. You become the one who softens your needs so they don't feel pressured. You start measuring the relationship by how well you can manage their comfort, rather than how safe you feel inside the connection. And at first, you call that patience. But over time, it becomes a quiet form of self-erasure. This is why your silence is sacred, because silence in this context is not indifference. It's an act of self-loyalty. It's you saying, "I will not keep trying to convince someone to value what I'm offering." It's you recognizing that the more you chase emotional availability, the more you teach yourself that love must be earned through exhaustion. That intimacy requires proving your worth, that your needs are a problem that must be carefully negotiated into tiny, palatable pieces. And that is not love that builds you. That is love that slowly drains you. Leaving them alone protects you from the slow bleeding that happens when you consistently give full access to someone who offers partial presence. It interrupts the pattern where your empathy becomes the safety net for their inconsistency. It stops you from rescuing the relationship every time they withdraw. It stops you from becoming the emotional glue while they remain emotionally optional. And once you stop being the glue, you finally get to see the truth of the structure. Was this relationship balanced, or was it surviving on your willingness to carry it alone? Your silence also protects your identity, because in avoidant dynamics, the loving partner often starts orbiting. You check your phone too much. You replay conversations. You search for hidden meanings. You interpret distance like a mystery instead of like a message. You start arranging your moods around their availability. When they're warm, you feel alive. When they're cold, you feel unstable. This is how love becomes a nervous system addiction. You become tethered to highs and lows that were never designed to be the foundation of a peaceful relationship. Silence breaks that addiction. Not overnight, but steadily. It removes the stimulus. It stops the daily reminders that keep your hope on a leash. It gives your mind the chance to return to clarity instead of obsession. It helps you remember who you were before you started negotiating your self-worth with someone else's emotional temperature. And here's the hard part that actually sets you free. Your silence must be for you, not for them. If you leave them alone as a strategy to provoke a chase, you will still be emotionally imprisoned by the outcome. You'll count days. You'll scan for signs. You'll interpret their every move like a prophecy. That still puts your dignity in their hands. But if you leave them alone because you finally respect your own heart, then your silence becomes powerful no matter what they do next. Because now your peace is no longer conditional. Now your self-respect isn't waiting for their apology. Now your worth isn't tied to whether they return. This is where you stop needing the avoidance reaction as a measurement of your value. You don't need them to panic to prove you mattered. You don't need them to regret to justify your pain. You don't need a dramatic comeback to validate that you deserved consistency. You begin to understand something quiet and unstoppable. You were worthy of stable love before they ever realized what your absence would feel like. Your silence also raises your standard, because when you stop chasing, you start seeing behavior clearly. You stop romanticizing crumbs. You stop calling mixed signals depth. You stop confusing intensity with compatibility. You stop interpreting their fear as your responsibility. You start asking a better question. Does this relationship protect my emotional safety or repeatedly challenge it? And if they do come back, your silence protects you from rushing into the same loop again. It helps you return with boundaries instead of hunger, with clarity instead of hope alone, with standards that are ready to be enforced calmly. You're no longer the version of yourself who will accept a sweet message as a full rebuild. You're the version of yourself who needs consistent behavior, respectful communication, and real repair. But if they don't come back, your silence still wins. Because it protected you from a future where you would have continued paying for love with your nervous system, where you would have continued shrinking your needs to keep closeness possible, where you would have continued trying to be easy to love while quietly becoming harder to recognize. So yes, avoidance may need space, but you need dignity even more. And when you finally give yourself that gift, you stop chasing someone's capacity and start honoring your own value. You stop begging for emotional basics. You stop treating inconsistency as a challenge you must pass. and you begin building a life where love doesn't demand your self-abandonment as the entry fee.